That'll be tough to follow. Great job. He did. Man alive! Look at this crowd. I know how much Granddad would love to be here right now. And he'd say, "What's all these people doing here?" They're here for you, and I know he's with us in spirit. So I'm going to be sharing some stories and some memories of Granddad contributed by members of the family. So thank you all for coming. And I will let you know I'm going to do my best. Sometimes I've been asked to talk in a British accent and to do some of these impressions, but the best I can do is not sound Scottish or Australian. So that's how I'm going about this. So I'm going to start with a story contributed by my dad, Carl, Derek's son. And let me start. So I'm going to read these as the person who contributed. So let me start out by saying hello to you all who've come here today to lay my dad to rest, and to share with you all a few stories from the family. I'm Carl, or as me dad would call me, his number 4 son. My dad wasn't perfect, but he was a pretty great dad. He left England when he was 42 years old, leaving behind a wife and 7 children to seek out a new life for us all. My own son, that's me, is 42 this year, so it puts things into perspective for me. He gave us a good life and he worked hard his entire life. My dad has lived a good, long life and did a lot of crazy stuff over the years, which resulted in a lot of great stories and even better memories. From pizza and take 2 nights at my house to the stories from my family that you'll hear today. One of my favorite stories of me dad is this one happened 10 years ago in 2015. It was the Snowmageddon year, if anyone remembers. The year it would not stop snowing. Similar to this year, actually. My dad was up at the Adanac Club uptown when a couple of cronies of his asked for a drive to the horse track, the racetrack on the east side at the exhibition park. My dad was more than happy to oblige the guys. If you remember this year, then you'll remember how high the snowbanks were. He made it to the track, dropped off the guys, kind of got a little bit mixed up with all the high banks. So he's telling me the story and he says, well, you know, at one point I turned a corner and all of a sudden it just completely opened up. Come to realize he was actually on the racetrack. He was in the car going all the way around. I asked him, did anyone kick you off the track? His answer was, no, they were plowing the track right in front of me. Rest up, Pilgrim. We'll be remembering you through stories like this the rest of our lives. The next story comes from Mandy. Mandy would be great-granddaughter. My favorite memory of Granddad is when I was in the hospital and just had Brandon. Granddad came to visit me and asked me if he could hold Brandon. Of course, I said yes. He looks right at him, looks at me and says, Mandy, he looks like Winston Churchill. To this day, that makes me laugh and it always will. Thank you, Mandy. Next memory I have is from Sarah. When we moved to Canada, Nana and Granddad met us at the airport. I had never met them before, and I was so excited. I ran to them. Granddad scoops me up in his arms and says, God, you're heavy. I was 4, and I can still remember this 46 years later as one of the funniest things he's ever said to me. That was just him. He said it like it was, and I'll miss that. And actually, through reading a lot of these, I'm now seeing where I get it. And I think a lot of us are like this. Here's from my sister Chelsea, one of the granddaughters. My memories of my granddad are always colorful, filled with song, guitar, hilarious anecdotes, silly stick people drawings, and loud boisterous laughter followed by cheers. I remember going to McNamara Drive and often wondering when that old garage would finally cave in. Playing with Lacey and getting a cream soda, or Granddad remarking how my huge hoop earrings would fit his budgie birds. One of the brightest memories is the huge, giant display of troll dolls in the back of this giant car he drove. Little naked dolls with bright, spiky hair and belly button jewelry. When I see a troll doll, it will always remind me of my granddad, and that seems perfectly fitting. Thank you, Chelsea. Next is from my brother Chris, my grandson. Granddad always greeted me the same way. Look at the size of this bloody cowboy! But around the golf course, I was known as Derek England's grandson, as a title I wear proudly to this day. Early on, I remember Granddad taking me to the golf course to walk around the woods looking for golf balls. I remember he stopped me in my tracks when I saw one land on the fairway, and I went running for it. Of course, I didn't want to get that one. And here's a similar story to earlier. About 6 years ago, my dad and I were golfing at Rockwood when we saw someone wandering down the fairway. We looked a bit harder, and sure enough, it was Granddad. We went down to pick him up, and he joined us for the rest of the round, giving tips and raving about Alan's smooth golf swing, even though Alan wasn't even there. I'll always miss his phone calls after bowling, but I'll think of him every time I start up the last car he owned. We'll miss you dearly, Granddad. Ta-ra. And here we have one from Yankee, Frank, or as we call him, Yankee. The one abiding memory of my dad is when I left our house in Birkenhead to catch a train down to Ipswich to join the Royal Navy. I was just 15 and caught the bus to the ferry terminal in order to cross over the River Mersey. Then I would walk from there to the train station. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning and my train was due to leave at 12. As I said, I was just 15 and thought I might crap myself due to fear. I was going all the way to East Anglia to the training ship HMS Ganges. I wandered around the station feeling pretty scared until lo and behold I saw me dad. He had taken time off work to come and see me. He chatted with me, and when I had to leave on the train, he shook my hand, in which he was hiding a 10-shilling note, or 10 pounds these days. He wished me luck and said he had to get back to work. I don't know how he got the time off to work to see me off. That would have been difficult, but I don't think he ever knew how much that meant to me. But it meant the world. Goodbye, Dad. I love you. Rest in peace with Mom. And you're late. All right, here's from Julie, his daughter. What can I say about my dad and what he meant to me? For a small man, my father lived a huge life, having the confidence and foresight to move his wife and 5 children to live in another country when he was in his 40s. That kind of says it all. He wanted a better life for us and had a choice to emigrate to Australia or Canada in the early 70s. I'm glad that it was Canada was chosen, as well, most of us are glad for sure. My mom actually put her foot down. There was no way she was going to Australia. Too many bugs and creepy crawlies, she said. Mm-hmm. So Canada became our home. My father loved St. John, its dry dock, its parks, its people, and of course its golf courses in St. John and surrounding areas. My dad made many friends through his work, his play, his many interests, and his joy of life. Many knew him as a lover of music, a gentleman, an incredible golfer, and as we all know, a bloody awful driver. How he was never in an accident is beyond us. He loved to sing and entertain people, especially karaoke after a few drinks, or performing for the old folks, as he called them, even though he was probably older than most. My father was a huge flirt with women, even to his last days, and he insisted on being clean shaven and dressed smartly, as he called it. Also, how many 97-year-olds are able to pick up their phone and dial an international number? My dad was able to do this to call his beloved brother Charlie in England, of whom he was incredibly proud. His brother's music proved to be such a comfort to my dad, especially in the last years of his life. One of my earliest memories of my father was him coming home from the pub, coming up to our bedrooms to sit on the bed, play his guitar, and sing us to sleep. The smell of beer in the room and the little package of cockles with vinegar, or clams as most people know them, he would always bring us, and that would fill the air. Off to sleep I would go. He was my dad, and I loved him deeply. Rest in peace, Dad, until we meet again. And I have some words from Alan, his youngest son. What can I say about my dad? Can you imagine starting a new life in a new country at the age of 45 with 5 kids, a wife, and no driver's license? For many of us, that sounds like a monumental task, but he did it. 45 years of memories left back in England, and who would have known that my father had another 52 years ahead of him to produce many more memories here in Canada. My father was a character like no other, a great sense of humor, an amazing golfer, and a friend to many. As the youngest of 7 kids, I may not have as many memories as the others do, but here are a few that I remember vividly. My father worked at the Irving shipyard back in the early 70s, and we would always look forward to Friday nights. We called it Sweet Night. He would come home after a long work week with a brown bag full of chocolate bars for us all. Doesn't sound like much to us, but it was a real treat. After a few years living in Willow Grove, we then moved into our first home in Lakewood Heights. I remember how excited my mom was when we finally moved into 85 McNamara Drive. My father was so proud of that house. He had actually bought it from Mrs. Mason, and rumor had it that Mr. Mason was buried in the backyard somewhere. Not sure about that one. My parents made some quick friends in the neighborhood, including Bill right across the street. My mom would often comment to my father how good Bill was at taking care of his house, cutting the grass and washing the windows. My dad would roll his eyes and finally came up with the name Wonderful Bill. I also remember when I was about 12 or 13, I was across the street in someone's yard making fun of their yapping dog. That dog got loose, chased me, and then bit me on the foot right through my sneaker. I went home crying. The people called my father and told him that their daughter had been bitten by their dog. It was funny to Dad, not so much to me. My dad taught me how to play golf as we grew up, taking me here and there, learning the game. He was so good at golf. Just ask him, he'll tell you. His hole-in-ones are legendary. His ball striking was as good as anyone. Back and threw the ball straight down the middle, he would say. I was always proud of his golfing abilities. As we grew up, I remember how bad my dad was at driving. I actually don't think he got any better throughout his lifetime. I do remember the long drives, though, from Bangor to Boston. He often let me drive when I was only about 13 or 14 years old. The good old days. I'll never forget that day in 1989 when the unthinkable happened, when my mom passed away at home. It was the saddest days of our lives, and this hit Dad very hard. We all knew it. Life had to go on for everybody, including Dad. In his later years, I remember visiting him at one of his apartments on the west side where he would just love to show you his paintings, often done on the backside of a cornflake box. Amazing Dad, I'd say. As many people know, my dad loved to sing, and we'd often sing karaoke at my house. He would always want the microphone. He would love to sing Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, and many more. He just loved it. Whenever I would perform some of my Elvis shows at the Villa, Dad would often walk around telling everybody how he taught me to sing. Thanks, Daddy. Some of Dad's favorite sayings in his last few years were, "Wow," and "How did I ever get to be 95? And then it was 96, then it was 97. And as we all know, when he went bowling, so when he would bowl, he'd call us afterwards and he'd say, "What do you think I bowled first string?" And then you have to guess. Then second string, and third string. Just a year or two ago, my wife and I brought him to our house in Quispam for just a little drive. He always loved to drive. We shared a small drink, sang a little bit. Then he had his eye on one of our bedrooms, said he'd be glad to move right in with us. He went back to Dobbelstein's and told everyone he was moving in with us. Not happening, Dad. In Dad's last years, we were oh so fortunate to have him under the care of Dobbelstein's care home. Paula and Patty, I could name so many names. You were all simply a gift from heaven above for my father. I cannot thank you enough for looking after him all that time. He loved you dearly. And Julie, my sister, thank you for being there for Dad all these last number of years. You extended his life so much with your constant care. Your kindness was above and beyond. And finally, Dad was in the right place at Bobby's Hospice. Another amazing, kind group of people that I will never forget. The night before he passed, I was able to hold him in my arms, tell him that I loved him, and he was able to look right back at me and gave me that final, "I know it's time to go" look. That's a moment I will never forget. The next morning, the call came that the end was very near. My daughter and her boyfriend were able to get there for Dad's last moments. Thank you, Danielle and Patrick, for that. God bless you, Dad. And as Frank Sinatra said, "You did it your way." Love, Alan. And I have one last thing to read. Sean and I are moving into a new home, and I've been packing, and I found something, and I thought it was a sign. This poem's called "Me and Your Mom." We met and we married a long time ago. We worked long hours and wages were low. No telly, no radio, no bath, times were hard. Just a cold water tap and a walk up the yard. No holidays abroad, no carpets on floors, but we had coal on the fire and we never locked doors. Our kids arrived, no pill in those days. We brought them up without the help of state aid. No Valium, no drugs, no LSD. We cured our pains with a good cup of tea. If you were sick, you were then treated at once, not fill up a form and come back next month. No vandals, no muggings, there was nothing to rob. In fact, you were rich with a couple of bob. People were happier in those far-off days, kinder and caring in so many ways. Milkmen and paperboys used to whistle and sing, and a night at the Flicks was a wonderful thing. Oh, we had our troubles and our share of strife, but we just had to face it, that was life. Now I'm alone and look back through the years. I don't think of the bad times, the trouble, the tears. I remember the blessings, our home, family, and our love. We shared them together, and I thank God above. Derek England. Thank you.